Okay, this is the Making Leaders interview with Bhavi Jagatia for airing as part of our Making Leaders series. Welcome to Making Leaders, a series of conversations with people who are leaders of this fast-changing industry, as well as those likely to step into leadership in the future. My name is Robert Bell, Executive Director of SSPI. The Making Leaders campaign helps space and satellite companies realize their potential for attracting and retaining the talented people who are so critical to the industry's future. And speaking of talent, I do have to ask you, are you space business qualified? Well, you are if you've registered for SBQ, a series of self-paced online training courses in the fundamentals of the space business, from launch and spacecraft to communications and markets. They are produced by SSPI in partnership with GSOA and the online training company SatProf. And you can learn more about SBQ at spacebq.org. That's spacebakerquebec.org. Today's conversation continues a series about the power of talent to drive our industry's success and the people and the organizations that make that talent mission happen. It will drop on the first Monday of every month as part of SSPI's regular podcast programming. The Making Leaders series is also made possible by the support of SSPI's corporate partners, including Access Intelligence, Hughes, and K&L Gates, and by the nearly 3,000 individual members of SSPI around the world. And if you're one of them, I thank you. And I also want to thank the space practice at Deloitte, the global consulting firm, and Momentous Space, developer of in-space servicing, for underwriting this year's award selection. In October of 2023, SSPI introduced its 20 under 35 employees and entrepreneurs of the year, selected from nominations from our global membership by an independent panel of judges. Now, all 21 are remarkable examples of early career talent and achievement, which you can see for yourself at 20under35.com. But our evaluation system does assign a score to each one, and members of the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame reviewed the top-scoring 20 under 35 and selected just 3 of them to receive a Promise Award. Now, we expect great things of all of our 20 under 35, but the Promise Awards signal the judgment of the industry's Hall of Fame that these 3 people have futures ahead of them of the greatest promise. We're speaking today with one of them, Bhavi Jagatia. She works for Planet as an astrodynamic... Yeah, sorry, we're going to start that paragraph again. We are speaking today with one of them, Bhavi Jagatia. She works for Planet as an Astrodynamics Engineer, and in that role, she devotes herself to continuous improvement of the systems that control Planet's global Earth observation network. Now, that sounds complicated, but it also sounds like she has a lot to do with Planet maintaining its competitive advantage in the EO market. For example, Planet is best known for its Dove small sats, but the company has been relying more and more on the SkySat constellation that it bought from Google in 2017. Now, Bhavi was asked to improve the tasking system that controls that constellation to boost its capacity for capturing image data. And she was so successful that Planet made her the sole owner and developer for the system. Now, Earth observation satellites also have to deal with something called sun glint, the reflection of sunlight from water right into the camera lens. For Planet's new constellation of hyperspectral imaging satellites, she wrote scheduling software to deal with that, and also figured out a low-cost way to confirm that it worked by testing it on an end-of-life Dove satellite. Other software she wrote lets her team model how planned changes will affect the all-important orbit determination system before those changes go into development. And that's made a big dent in both risk and development time. When not improving technology processes, she volunteers in underprivileged schools in the Bay Area to share her knowledge with girls and non-binary youth, as well as being an instructor in Planet's internship program. And all of that explains why she is one of this year's Promise Award winners. Bhavi, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Robert. I'm so excited to be here.
Tell us about the work you do and the contribution that you believe it makes.
Yeah, so on the core of it, I work on orbits. My task is to, like you described, to work on maintaining, designing, and operating orbits-related tasks for all our constellations. That's it, Doves and SkySats, and then in the future, Pelicans and Tanagers. And just by working at Planet, it's there are innumerable contributions it's making to the world because Planet has put itself on the forefront of as a public benefit company. So at the beginning, it's to make all this data accessible. So every imagery we take immediately ends up on Planet Explorer, and then we try to price it right. We try to work with organizations that give back to the community and make this data either cheap or make it accessible or give them insights that might just make it as actionable for them as possible. In terms of in crisis related areas, we try to not pick a side. We try to equitably give the data to all parties involved, and most importantly, give it free to all the human rights organizations. Or if there is a disaster, we try to make sure that we're out there, tasking our satellites to point at it and get data as quickly as possible. And again, to pull it back to my role in it as someone who tasking is a big thing that I do. So for our SkySat constellation, which is an entirely tasking-based constellation, me and my team, we work on optimizing these algorithms that schedule how these satellites will collect these images, how the satellites will do it in addition to their health activities like maneuvering or downlinking the data.
I've had the pleasure of interviewing actually the three founders of your company. That interview is available on our website as well. So if any of our viewers want to know more about that side of the company, it's a good thing to listen to. What led you into this industry? I mean, why work here instead of another tech sector? Because there sure are plenty of them that could use your skills.
Yeah, I have a very cookie cutter journey that led me here. I have this very clear incident. I remember I was 5 or 6 years old. I would read Sunday newspapers with my dad because there was always a big spread, something in addition to just the news on Sunday. And that Sunday, it was one of the Apollo anniversaries. And so the big spread was Apollo landing, man on the moon. And as a 5-year-old, never exposed to space, and I grew up in India, so we didn't really have a big space program back then. I It made no sense to me. The moon was just a dot in the sky. So to have this big spread about a man standing on the moon, like the scale of it didn't make any sense. And so my dad explained to me what it means, what space is, what space travel is. And honestly, it was a split-second decision for me. Since then, I was either going to be an astronaut or I was going to work in the space industry. And I became one of those kids. I was obsessed with it. I had my journals where I'd get like newspaper cutouts of every space mission that was being spoken about and stick it there. So then I learned astronauts are space engineers or mechanical engineers or electrical engineers. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go be an engineer. And that's kind of what led me into this industry. And then when I was in university, I did a lot of outreach work for the environment and for students in STEM. And that's kind of how I discovered Planet, because Planet does do a lot of outreach, like we just spoke about. So that's how I knew that I needed to work at Planet, because that's how I could achieve my dream of working in space, but still give back to the planet and the community around me.
Checked all your boxes. Yeah, that's was there for them. I was there in front of the TV for the first moon landing. It was something else. Now, when you join a business, you bring certain skills to it, but you also need to develop a working knowledge of the industry around it. We kind of refer to that big space industry that so interested you. Looking back, what do you think was some of the most important working knowledge that you gained that's helping you be successful now?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of working I did mechanical engineering, so I worked across many industries. I worked in chip manufacturing for a bit, on aircrafts, and then on composite materials, and then eventually in aerospace. And so one thing that I've noticed that has stayed consistent across all industries and helping me be successful at all those different roles was creative problem solving. Like resourcefulness is a word I use. I almost say it's almost being stubborn about solving a problem. So if one way doesn't work, you think a little outside the box, you go to the second way, you think a little differently, you go to the other one. because there's always a solution. It's out there, and it doesn't. It does. There is a solution out there, but there are multiple solutions out there. So you just have to go find one that is going to give you the minimal viable solution for your problem right now. And so it's just to keep at it, and it's something that just comes with practice. It's the resilience of not giving up with a problem. And then another one that I really think has helped me be successful is always learning from all the people you meet, because you meet so many diverse people from diverse backgrounds and diverse work experiences, life experiences, and they always have something to teach you. So to enter each interaction, wanting to learn what helps them be successful, and then taking that positive habit and trying to implement that in my work ethic.
That's so interesting what you said. I really liked it because I like to solve problems too, and I have that same stubbornness, which sometimes leads me to bang my head against the wall, but okay. But I've observed that a lot of people who don't seem to be able to do that, I think they're overwhelmed by anxiety. They feel like they can't solve it, therefore they're already deciding, instead of just sitting there and looking at the problem and waiting and waiting. I think it was John Huston, the film director, who talked about how sometimes you don't know what's going on, it's never going to work, and then you look at it and well, if you just sit there long enough and stare
Yeah.
at it, you'll think of something.
Yeah, and sometimes solutions come in the randomest of places, because I'll be trying to solve something and I wouldn't figure it out, and then I'll just take a step away, go take a walk or make some lunch, and then right there, it was right there all along. I just couldn't see it. Yeah,
I love it when
but
your brain just is working for you and you don't have to make it work. It's just,
exactly, yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh,
But like, oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
I know, it's your turn.
I was gonna say, if I had just posed the problem as unsolvable or moved on to the next task, then I would have missed that moment on my walk. So that's why just to keep at it a little longer than you think is necessary.
Okay, so that's a couple of good things that you picked up, but what is there a big lesson or the biggest lesson maybe you learned in your career? Usually when things don't go well is how it happens, but how did you learn it?
Yeah. For me, I used to be very, just on the same theme, I used to be very afraid of making a mistake, very afraid of failure. I feel like most young engineers are, because, our entire education, it's about perfectionism. It's getting the best grade and getting the best job. So I used to, I used to be sometimes so afraid of making a mistake that I wouldn't attempt the hardest of problems, because then if I couldn't complete it, then why attempt it? But then I think through working, this is like my mindset in university, but now having worked a few internships and now this job at Planet, I've realized that the end goal is we're all on the same journey. So we only get there if a few of us make mistakes, and we all learn from it. And so the goal is to not make a mistake. The goal is to make it fast, learn fast, and improve fast. And I do appreciate the culture that's built around it at Planet, because if as long as you allow people to make a mistake, that's how everyone improves. Yeah, so that's something that I had to undo some hardwiring to learn that one. And then another one that I think I've had to learn as a female engineer is just self-advocating. So recognizing my skills, my strengths, and the requirements that I have for growth, and then making sure that I am requesting that from, the team above me.
Interesting. I will always remember a professor saying to me about it, something that I'd done. He said, "Boy, you made a big mistake, but it was the most interesting mistake." And I thought, okay.
Those are the best compliments, because you thought outside the box.
That's where I live, unfortunately. If you could go, actually, that's not the question I want to ask. Space and satellite today are growing in an endless number of directions. What part of the business right now are you finding most interesting or compelling?
Yeah. I'm sure you watched it, the Starship launch last week. I think recently that's where my mind's been at. I want to see what this industry is going to do once large rockets become a reality again. Because for for years, it was about making things smaller, making your payload smaller, making, all the electronic GNC, all the support systems smaller. And that's where the innovation lay. And now with a bigger rocket becoming a reality, especially with it being reusable or the frequency at which they're planning to launch it, I'm sure the cost to access will also be low, which means now the pendulum has to sway in the other direction. And I am just excited to see how the industry develops when large payloads, large, cheap payloads become a reality, and what kind of innovation is out there for that.
Really interesting. It's funny. I obviously, like everybody else, I follow it. You're right. It's going to produce things that we can't even imagine right now. If you could go back in time, which unfortunately you can't unless you come up with that technology, what career advice would you give yourself right there at the beginning when you were either going for internships or getting your first paying job?
Yeah, honestly, I would have done the previous one with the it's okay to make mistakes, but knowing myself, I wouldn't listen because back then I was so afraid of it. But I think that gives me a little pause. I think so. I luckily had this advice from my grandpa when I was very young. He was kind of a pioneer. He didn't have much of a formal education, and he became an electrical engineer by trade just by learning as he went. And so he would always tell me, if you want to learn something, you want to do something, and you can't, if you feel like you're alone in it, don't give up, just persist. So don't be afraid of doing something for the fear of being the only one doing it. And I feel like that advice has gotten me so far because as I have grown in my career, I have progressively gone from 10 women in a class of 200 to 3 to 2 to 1 to sometimes like now it doesn't even faze me when I'm the only one in a room who looks like me. And so initially, I feel like when I was younger, I would just not do it. I just might not have signed up for a project team if I didn't feel like there was someone I could relate to or someone I could talk to. But over the years, I've had to unlearn that skill and, you know, have more faith in myself and just follow my passion, even if I have to follow it alone.
One of the accomplishments of our award program that I'm proud of is that we've been doing this for years, but years ago, the Promise Award winners were always all male, always all white male. And now I look around and we're about 50-50 male, female. We're starting to become ethnically diverse. This industry has really got some great stuff ahead of it. This final question before we quit, and this is, in addition to Starship, what is happening in this business that you think is going to be most important or transformative for the future, and not just the future of our industry, but really the future of the world?
Yeah, I just I hmm, let's see. I don't want to be one of those people who just says, let's see what AI does to aerospace, or because AI is changing, revolutionizing all the industries out there. But at least on my team, we've been wondering about how we can incorporate it in a lot of our systems are automated because we operate hundreds of satellites, so we can't be operating them manually. So we've been trying to see how we can take some of that automation, incorporate AI into it, and see what kind of insights we get out of that. And if there is some optimization left to squeeze that we haven't been able to do with like the algorithms that we've written. So like, for example, like collision avoidance between satellites, that's such a procedural thing where we have a parameter for probability of collision or collision distance. And then, so what if we could incorporate this and see if it could just detect it in advance? It could run our automation for us and then tell us, hey, have a human operator prove and say, hey, this is the solution I found using the system that you created. If it looks good enough, we should ship it. Or that's just an example, but or different ways. There are ways in which we can include it in our scheduling algorithm as well. So that's something that we've been thinking about just for the work that I do. But moreover, on a larger scale, I'm sure there are other companies that are incorporating it in different ways. Another thing I'm excited to see is this recent push for SSA, and I was at SmallSat this year, and there were so many conversations around it, including all operators from these different private companies, because earlier it just used to be they themed SPCS, and now with all these companies coming up, everyone wants to be a champion for SSA, but being that requires you to share data, requires you to share information about your satellite states with companies that are competitors. And so what kind of system is going to evolve, and what is the space policy behind it, and how do we work together? How do we enforce that policy? That's something that I think will be a bigger space industry push that I expect to see in the next 5 years.
We did a Better Satellite World video on space debris and risks in space. And there were two things that came out of it, which really I wasn't expecting. One was the idea that we really are, one of the ways we're going to deal with space debris is by designing a future in which everything is in motion up there and is dynamic. So AI, yeah, absolutely. But the other one was just this degree of sometimes you despair because you think we'll never get the cooperation we need. But in point of fact, this industry has been cooperating like that for about 50
Yeah.
years. So I think we're going to be all right.
I think so. When I talk to like non-aerospace engineers, and the first question they ask is, isn't it getting like crowded up there? Is there even space to put another satellite in? Space is huge. There's a lot of space up there, but I think people are always surprised when they hear about how cooperative the industry is in general, because in my role, I often talk to operators from other companies, and we have meetings where we have this exact conversation, and I don't hear my friends say who work in the automotive industry, because that's another place with the self-driving cars, and I don't hear them. They're so surprised because they're not having these conversations with their competitors, just to see how they can achieve a greater level of cooperation. So space has always been a very open industry in that sense, and I appreciate that a lot.
Well, unfortunately, that has to be it for now, Bhavi, because it's been both fun and inspiring for me. And I want to congratulate you on once again being one of our 20 under 35 and also a Promise Award winner.
Thank you, Robert.
Like any tech industry, the space and satellite business is driven by the ambition, the knowledge, and the leadership skills of its people. In our Making Leaders series, we take time away from business plans and technology roadmaps to focus on the people making a difference. We thank SSPI's individual members and corporate partners, Access Intelligence, Hughes, and K&L Gates, for supporting the Making Leaders series, and Deloitte and Momentous Space for underwriting our selection of the Promise Award winners. You can follow us on Twitter at SSPI. I guess I should say X now, but I'm still going to say Twitter. On Facebook or LinkedIn, just search for Space and Satellite Professionals. If you're not a member, I encourage you to become one by going to sspi.org/join. That's JOIN. For SSPI and Making Leaders, this is Robert Bell. And we're out. Let me click the stop recording button wherever it is. Stop recording.